There's something wrong with the grave surrounding it, and it's not finished growing. I never should have come to this place. That's what people always say in situations like this, right? But the truth is, I had to come here after losing Marvin. The city had become unbearable, like a maze of sympathetic glances and whispered condolences. The cabin in the Forgotten Woods promised exactly what I needed: isolation, silence, and space to paint again. Sam tried to talk me out of it, of course. That's what best friends do. She helped me unload my art supplies and settle in, all while rattling off facts about wild animals and the dangers of living alone in remote places. But beneath her practical worries, I could sense something else. The way her eyes kept flicking toward the overgrown graves around the cabin. How her usual confident stride became hesitant on the weed-choked path. I should have paid more attention to those signs. I should have wondered why the rent was so low, why the realtor's smile seemed forced when I signed the lease. But grief makes you blind to warning signs, or maybe it just makes you stop caring about them. Old man Grady wasn't as subtle. I met him at the general store during my first supply run. His weathered face tightened with concern when I mentioned where I was staying. He told me about the graves, about how they were older than the town itself, that no one knew who they belonged to, that there was no official cemetery. He said something else too, something about collecting what's lost, but then he hurried away, muttering what sounded like a prayer. The first week was peaceful. I painted more than I had in months, inspired by the ethereal quality of the morning mist rolling between the gravestones, the way shadows danced through the ancient trees. But as the days grew shorter, I started noticing small things. The unnatural silence, the way the local wildlife seemed to avoid the area entirely. Then the sounds began. Started as a subtle clicking, like dry twigs snapping underfoot. I thought it was the cabin settling like old buildings do, but the sound grew more distinct, more deliberate, like a rhythmic clacking, almost like wind chimes made of bone. Sam visited again, bringing supplies and worried questions about my increasingly erratic phone calls. I hadn't realized how much my voice had changed, how the isolation was affecting me. She stayed the night, and that's when everything changed. We were awakened by a sound I'll never forget, a horrible grinding noise, like stones scraping against stone. Through the window, in the pale moonlight, we saw it. The graves were opening, but not from above. The earth was pushing upward, as if something beneath was stretching awake. What emerged wasn't a single creature, but a grotesque collection of bones. Bones of different sizes, different ages, moving together in impossible ways. They assembled themselves in front of us, forming a towering figure that seemed to grow more complete with every passing second. I recognized some of the newer bones. They were bleached white, unlike the weathered gray of the others. These were recent additions. Ever the rational one, Sam tried to document it. That was her mistake. The flash from her phone camera caught its attention, and the thing moved with surprising grace for something so unnaturally constructed. The temperature dropped. Our breath was visible in the suddenly cold air. We ran. What else could we do? The forest was pitch black, and in our panic, we lost the main trail. Sam took the lead. She had always had a better sense of direction, but the undergrowth here was thick, the years of neglect creating a maze of thorny bushes and fallen branches. Our footsteps cracked loudly on the dead leaves and twigs, each sound feeling like a beacon to whatever was chasing us. The beam of Sam's phone flashlight bounced erratically as we ran, casting disorienting shadows that made every tree look like a looming figure. I could hear her breathing getting heavier. She twisted her ankle on a hidden root but kept pushing forward. That awful clicking sound grew louder, joined by whispers. God, the whispers, voices I almost recognized, calling out in different tones, some fresh with fear, others worn down by centuries of crying. I made it to the car. Sam didn't. The authorities never found her body. Of course, they searched the woods for days, but the graves remained undisturbed. Old man Grady avoided me when I finally worked up the courage to return for my things. But as I was leaving, he pressed a yellowed newspaper clipping into my hand. It detailed the disappearance of his brother in those same woods 60 years ago. I haven't touched a paintbrush since that night. Sam's parents still call me sometimes, hoping for answers I can't give. How do you tell someone their daughter was taken by something that shouldn't exist? That her last act was pushing me ahead, making sure I reached the car first? The guilt eats at me every day. I drove past the cabin last month. There's a new car in the driveway, probably another artist or writer looking for solitude. I almost stopped, almost walked up to warn them, but the sun was setting, casting long shadows across those nameless graves, and I couldn't make my feet move any closer. Instead, I drove straight to Sam's parents' house and stayed with them until dawn. They're the only ones who understand why I can't be alone in the dark anymore, why I flinch at the sound of branches scraping against windows. We sit together, sharing memories of Sam, trying to keep her alive in the only way we can. It's not enough. It will never be enough. That's the thing about grief. It doesn't need whispers in the dark or monsters in the woods. The real horror lives in the empty chair at dinner, the phone number I still can't delete, and the knowledge that I survived when she didn't. I'm a contractor with a deep fear of spiders. What I saw in my cousin's deserted cabin made me realize that fear wasn't as silly as I thought. I never wanted to take over Cousin Marvin's old hunting place. The moment I got the deed in the mail, I felt a knot in my stomach at the thought of those thick woods he used to vanish into for long stretches. As someone who works in carpentry, I should have been glad for the chance to fix up a place, maybe even flip it and make a little cash. But something about that cabin always gave me a bad feeling. Even in the few snapshots I'd come across, the place looked off. The drive up took a little over 4 hours, my truck crawling along rough dirt paths while the GPS flickered in and out. Thick trees pressed in on both sides, branches tapping the glass like thin hands trying to get in. I kept reminding myself this was just another property check, no different from dozens I'd done before. But my palms were already sweaty on the steering wheel. You see, I've got a real issue with spiders, not just a casual dislike. I'm talking full-on, chest-tightening, panic attack kind of fear. It's cost me jobs in the past, especially when I had to work in crawl spaces. Over time, I'd gotten better at handling it, learned to take slow breaths, remind myself they didn't want to mess with me. Funny how useless that mindset turned out to be. The cabin came into view all at once, a dark lump against the dimming sky. The way it was built just felt wrong. Angles that made no sense, windows placed at weird spots. Marvin had built it with his own 2 hands, and now I could clearly see why nobody wanted to buy it after he vanished. The roof dipped dangerously, the porch leaned heavily, and the whole building seemed like it was trying to sink back into the forest. I pulled out my checklist and tried to go at it step by step. Start with the foundation, then the frame, then see if any utilities were even hooked up this far out. As I walked toward the porch, my flashlight's beam lit up a web-filled nightmare, but I focused instead on the rotting wood under my boots. Just your average spiders, I told myself. No reason to panic. The front door groaned open with the sound of metal grinding on metal. The air inside was thick with dust, mildew, and that abandoned building scent, but layered under that was something else. Something sharp and chemical like bleach and rust. My light caught the walls and my stomach flipped. They were covered in webs, not delicate or scattered, but thick, strong strands, like rope spun with intent. That's when I saw the first one. I figured it had to be a trick of the light, maybe a child's toy tangled in the silk. But then it shifted. Then I saw its face, a human face, tiny and complete, stretched across the belly of the spider like some horrible mask. Eyes blinked at me, real eyes, and a mouth curled up into a grin that made my knees buckle. I backed up fast, my tools clanking to the ground. Then I noticed more motion. Dozens, no, hundreds of faces peeking from the webs, everyone unique. Everyone familiar in a way that made my breath catch. My grandma's face on one, a girl I'd known in school on another. The faces giggled and murmured, their voices blending into a high-pitched drone that filled my skull. I hit the door behind me, but it wouldn't move. Webbing had wrapped around it, thickening fast. I felt it brush my arms and neck, light as feathers but wrong in every way. The spiders were lowering themselves now, all of them with human faces, and they were all staring at me like they knew me. That's when I saw Marvin. His face was stretched across the largest spider of them all. It was coming out of a gap in the ceiling. He looked exactly like I remembered, except now his eyes were those of a bug, reflecting my panic in broken shards. His mouth opened and I watched, horrified, as insect jaws clicked behind human teeth. My body moved before I could think. I threw myself at the door, feeling the webbing tear as I shoved through it with everything I had. It ripped apart with a sick noise, and I tumbled out onto the porch. Pain tore through my hands as splinters dug in, but I got up fast. I knew what was inside. The buzzing voices grew louder behind me as I ran for the truck. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice before shoving them into the ignition. In the rearview mirror, I saw them, pouring out of the cabin like a flood of legs and faces, all moving together like they shared one mind. The engine caught just as the first few reached the tires. I slammed the gas, the wheels spinning before finally grabbing hold. The truck slid side to side as I hit the curves too fast, branches whipping the glass. The voices chased me down those narrow roads, carried on a wind that shouldn't have been able to keep up. Welcome to the family. I filed the demolition papers the very next morning. The first crew walked off the job halfway through, said their tools kept jamming on webbing too strong to cut. The second team wouldn't go back after their supervisor vanished for hours, then came back pale and silent, refusing to talk about what he saw. The cabin is still out there, somewhere in those woods. I've spent over a decade in this line of work, fixing up buildings that look too far gone. I used to think there was always an answer for every crack and creak. But now I know some places are meant to fall apart. Some doors should stay locked. The forest around that cabin has grown thicker. The roads that used to reach it have mostly been covered by brush and roots. I've gone back to my city life, the simple lines and straight angles of normal buildings. But sometimes, when I'm working alone and hear a strange noise in the walls, I think back to those faces. And I'm thankful some secrets stay buried out in the deep woods, far away from anyone with the misfortune to stumble across them. I've always been the sort of person who finds peace in being alone. As a building designer, I often need quiet moments to draw and clear my thoughts. That's why I began taking solo backpacking trips, to get away from the constant buzz of emails, deadlines, and meetings. But after what happened in that forest last December, I realized that sometimes being alone isn't a gift, it's a warning. I had looked at the weather before I left. Light flurries, nothing out of the ordinary. I had the right gear and experience. I'd done winter hikes plenty of times. I always packed well and planned ahead. Still, nature doesn't care how careful you think you are. The storm rolled in just under 7 miles down the trail. What started as soft flakes quickly turned into blinding white winds. The cold hit hard, and the gusts cut through my jacket like icy blades. That's when I spotted it. A dark, square shape among the trees, too straight to be natural. A shelter, a cabin. I wish I could say I paused, that something told me to stay away. But truthfully, I was shaking so badly by then that I could barely think straight. The door opened when I tried it. I thought I'd gotten lucky. Even now, that thought makes me sick. Inside, the air had that smell of old smoke and damp wood, the kind you only find in buildings that have been around a while. The setup was simple. A main room with a heavy table, a corner bed, and a stone hearth where warm ash still sat. Someone had clearly been there not long before. There was a tidy pile of logs by the fireplace, as if someone had stocked it up for a guest. I lit a fire and tried calling for help, but there was no signal. Outside, the snow had become a roaring wall of sound. The windows turned into blank, icy mirrors. As it got dark, the silence inside became overwhelming, like the air itself was pressing in around me. That first night, I blamed the strange feeling on the weather. The groans and faint noises could have been the wind. The soft tapping on the roof could have just been branches. But waking up at 3 in the morning to see one of the oil lanterns lit, one I knew I hadn't touched, that's when the fear truly started creeping in. I work in architecture. I deal in shapes, spaces, and facts. I notice when things change. So when I saw the chair at the end of the table pulled out slightly the next morning, a chair I hadn't gone near. I knew something was off, and the light dent in the seat cushion hadn't been there the day before either. That second night is when I really started to break. I woke up, and I wasn't alone anymore. I so badly wanted to be wrong, to still be dreaming. They were standing in the corners, sitting around the table, hovering by the side of my bed. Shapes that looked like people but wrong, like someone tried to recreate humans from memory but never saw one in real life. Their faces were mostly blank, just dips and hollows, empty spots where eyes should have been. I wish I could say I stood up to them, that I said something, did something, but all I did was yank the blanket over my head and curl up like a frightened kid. I lay there trembling until sunlight crept through the windows. By morning, they were gone, but I could feel the cabin watching me. The walls seemed to carry whispers, always too soft to understand. Shadows twitched at the edge of my vision whenever I turned my head. I tried keeping myself distracted. I split logs until I could barely move my arms. I drew sketch after sketch until my pencil wore down. I did anything I could to keep from thinking too much. But while the storm kept raging outside, it felt like the inside of that place was twisting with it. The rooms didn't feel quite the same. If I wasn't looking directly at them, the corners seemed to stretch. The ceiling felt closer. The space shifted when I blinked. The third night was the worst. They came back, and this time there were more of them. They filled every part of the cabin. Those empty faces turned toward me all at once, and though they had no eyes, I could feel them watching. The air turned heavy. Breathing felt like drowning. I yelled at them, begged them to go, but they didn't move. Not at first. Then they started to close in. Their movements were twitchy and wrong, like a video being played in reverse. I tried to escape. I remember grabbing the door handle, it was frozen solid. I remember the windows covered in such thick frost they were like blocks of cloudy glass. I remember the pressure in my skull building until I could barely see. Then nothing. When I woke, everything was silent. The snowstorm had passed. Everything was covered in a bright layer of white. The door was open slightly, letting in the morning sun. Outside, I saw tracks leading away from the door. Not human, but not quite animal either. They disappeared into the trees about 30 feet out. I've never gone back. I never planned to. The official report said a search team found me 2 days later, curled up and badly dehydrated, barely conscious. They said the structure I described doesn't appear on any of their charts. That area, according to them, is just deep woods. No signs of any cabin. I've given up trying to explain it. I still work as an architect now, but people notice something different in my work. They say I avoid sharp corners, that I always use large windows, that every room seems to have more exits than it needs. They call it clever, original, but I know what it really is. Every building I design now is my way of pushing back against the shape of that place. My quiet way of making sure some spaces stay safe. I used to laugh at my coworkers who took these nature getaways. You know the type, burned-out Chicago professionals posting filtered selfies of their rustic escapes, acting like they tapped into some ancient wisdom between overpriced trail mix and wellness podcasts. But after the Martinelli case, the one I'd poured over a year into, fell apart, something in me broke. One night around 2 a.m., surrounded by stacks of legal briefs and my fifth cup of stale coffee, I found myself scrolling through listings for secluded rentals. That's how I ended up booking Cabin 17 in the Wisconsin Range. No reception, no Wi-Fi, no contact with the outside world. Just me and whatever I had dragged out there from the city. The listing had just a couple of blurry pictures and a vague blurb about true solitude. Sounded perfect. I didn't even read the reviews. The drive took over 4 hours from Chicago, and with every mile, the real world seemed to fade behind me. Towns turned to farms, farms turned to forest. Eventually, I was following a dirt trail through thick woods. My GPS quit halfway there, leaving me to follow a rough sketch the property owner had emailed. I nearly missed the faded sign for Dry Creek Road, braking hard to avoid overshooting the turn. As I sat there idling, A Forest Service truck pulled alongside me. The ranger, a woman who looked to be in her late 50s, rolled down her window and asked if I was trying to find something. When I mentioned cabin 17, her radio crackled with sharp static, though her hand was nowhere near it. She stared at it too long, then looked back at me and said I should be sure I had enough emergency gear. "Weather changes quick up here," she said. But the way she said it made it feel like she wasn't talking about storms. Before I could reply, she pulled away. The cabin looked about right. Old wooden siding, a tiny porch overlooking a clearing that faded into dense forest. But it didn't feel right. Something about the place was off. The trees were silent. No birds, no rustling. Just a stillness that swallowed sound. Inside, it was modest. One bedroom, a kitchenette, and a small living area with a stone hearth. While unpacking, I found an old, worn notebook jammed between the mattress and the wall. Figured it belonged to a past guest. The first few pages were standard stuff, notes about hiking trails, bugs, birds. But halfway through, the writing changed. The neat penmanship gave way to shaky, scribbled lines. Entire pages were filled with phrases like "don't look at her" and "the crying never." I should have left then. But I'm a lawyer. I deal in facts, not ghost stories. I told myself it was some prank. Maybe kids broke in and left it there. Still, I checked every lock before bed that night. I woke to the sound of someone crying. Soft, far away, but definitely human. A woman's voice, broken with sorrow. My first thought was that someone might be injured. I looked through the bedroom window. The clearing outside was quiet, bathed in silver moonlight. The crying didn't stop. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, yet nowhere I could pinpoint. Then I saw her, a shape by the edge of the trees, barely more than a shadow, but there. She seemed to be wearing a long dress that drifted strangely in the breeze, like it was underwater. I blinked, and she was gone. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I told myself it had just been a dream. I even went to the spot where I'd seen her. Nothing, no disturbed needles, no footprints. But the air felt wrong, cold and heavy despite the summer sun. And that sense of being watched never went away. That second night changed everything. The crying started earlier, louder. It didn't just echo in my ears. It settled in my bones. Every sob felt like it had been crying for centuries. Against every instinct, I walked to the window. She was back, closer now, maybe 30 feet from the porch. This time I could see more. Long, tangled hair hanging in clumps. A dirty dress that might have once been white. But I couldn't help myself. I was already at the door before I realized what I was doing. Some part of me wanted to know. Needed to. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. The cold hit instantly, as if I'd walked into a freezer. Just hours earlier, it had been nearly 80 degrees. The crying got louder with each step I took. My flashlight didn't quite light her. Its beam seemed to curve away from her outline. 20 feet, 15, 10. Close enough now to see her shoulders jerking with each sob. I called out, asking if she was okay. She stopped crying. The silence that followed felt wrong. Too deep, like sound itself had been pulled out of the air. Then she started to turn, but the motion wasn't natural. It looked like someone had reversed a video, jerky and unnatural. What I saw next still haunts me. Where her face should have been, there was nothing. Not a blur, not blackness, just nothing. Like my brain couldn't accept it. The space where her face should have been seemed to reject reality. Looking at it physically hurt. I felt like I was being pulled toward it. Not my body, but my thoughts, my mind itself. My instincts kicked in. The flashlight dropped from my hands. I stumbled backward, tripping through underbrush. I hit a tree hard enough to scrape my palms. She stepped toward me. Again, moving wrong, like frames had been removed from time. The air grew colder than anything I've ever felt. Every breath stung. I scrambled, half crawling back to the cabin, never lifting my eyes from the ground. The sobbing changed as I moved. It sounded like laughter now, but not laughter. A sound that pretended to be laughter, twisting into something even more wrong. I slammed into the cabin's door, shoved it open, and fell inside. I threw my weight against it and wedged a chair under the knob, though I knew somehow it wouldn't help. Whatever she was, doors wouldn't stop her. I hid in the bedroom, wedged between the wall and the bed. Outside, shadows slid under the doorframe. The crying returned, louder than before, shaking the windows. The air inside grew so cold I could see my breath clouding in front of me. Beside me, the journal lay open. Its warnings weren't crazy now. They were the only thing that made sense. It lasted for hours. When the sun finally came up, I didn't pack. I didn't even check the road conditions. I just got in my car and drove. I stopped for gas just outside Erie, shaking so badly I could barely hold the pump. I called the owner later to ask if he could mail me the stuff I left behind. He didn't seem surprised. I looked into it afterward. Cabin 17 was built sometime in the 1930s. Over the years, 6 solo travelers had disappeared there. Locals tell stories of a mother who lost her kids in the woods and died searching. They say her sadness holds her there. But I don't think that's what I saw. What I saw wore sadness like a costume. Something older. Something that pretended to be human long enough to lure you in. I need to get this down while I still can. My hands won't stop trembling, and every time I try to record my voice, the device starts glitching. There's grime under my nails and ash smeared across my clothes, but I haven't cleaned up yet. Not while that laughter still echoes in my ears. I should start from the beginning while my thoughts are still clear enough to make sense. My name is Kyle Mercer. I write freelance articles for outdoor travel magazines, usually covering off-the-map spots where people go to get away and clear their heads. Now that I think about it, that irony hits hard. About 3 weeks back, I was desperate to be alone. Writer's block had hit me like a wall, and my editor kept hounding me about overdue pieces. That's when I stumbled on an ad for a cabin. It seemed ideal, far from town, probably out of range for a cell signal, and just rustic enough to match the kind of stories I write. The rent was surprisingly low for such a big place, which in hindsight should have raised a red flag. The woman who handled the rental sounded strangely relieved when I paid for the full month upfront. She mentioned that a few others had left early, but I barely registered the comment. I was too focused on the idea of finally having room to breathe, to focus, to reset. The first several days went exactly as I'd hoped. The cabin groaned a bit at night, but given its age, well over 100 years, I figured it was just settling. The noises even had a charm to them, like the house was whispering stories waiting to be written. I set up my workspace near the old brick fireplace, got into a rhythm, and actually started making headway with my work. Then came that first night. I was half asleep when I heard it. A soft giggle, almost like a child, coming from underneath the floorboards. At first, I blamed it on the wind or maybe a critter burrowed under the house. But something about that laugh, it made my skin tighten. It wasn't just one voice. It was layers of laughter, overlapping in a way that felt like it was mocking happiness itself. I told myself I was overthinking it. I've spent years debunking myths and local ghost tales for a living. There's always a logical reason. The next morning, I chalked it up to a dream, but the laughter came back the following night. Louder now. It seemed to move from room to room beneath my feet. I found myself tiptoeing, as though being quiet might stop whatever was down there from noticing me. That's when the cabin started changing. Small things at first. A chair slightly moved, a mug in a different spot than I'd left it. I started snapping photos with my phone just to reassure myself I wasn't losing it. But the pictures showed something else, too. The trapdoor in the living room floor, it was slowly opening, just a sliver more each day. I wish I could say I left right then. Anyone with common sense would have. But my ego, and the need to explain it all rationally, kept me there. I told myself I was just bored, inventing a story instead of finishing the one I was paid to write, turning isolation into some haunted fantasy. The night I finally worked up the nerve to check the crawl space, the laughter changed. It began to sound like me, mimicking my nervous chuckle, the one I'd been using to convince myself this wasn't serious. That's when I felt real fear, not the kind that jumps at you, but the slow, creeping kind that turns your blood cold. My flashlight revealed markings beneath the house, crude carvings etched into the wooden beams. Mouths, dozens, no hundreds, each with unsettling detail. And when I glanced away, some of them looked like they shifted slightly, like they were trying to move between moments. The air down there was heavy, filled with the scent of damp earth, and something else, something sour, like rotted meat. I scrambled back up, heart pounding, but it was too late. The laughter rose again, louder, surrounding me from every corner. The wooden planks beneath my feet started to bow and creak like they were alive. And through the widening cracks, I saw it. Not a thing, not exactly. A mass of mouths, all opening and moving on their own. Some whispering, some shrieking with laughter. They formed a shape that might resemble a person, but nothing about it was truly human. And those mouths, they started speaking to me, repeating my name, echoing things I'd said to myself, quoting phone calls I thought were private. I bolted, not bravely, not cleverly, just pure survival. I tore through the woods, tripping, stumbling, as that laughter chased me. It wasn't just behind me, it was in my skull, dredging up every insecurity, every hidden fear I'd buried over the years. Now I'm parked miles away, trying to make sense of it all. The part of my brain that built a career out of reason keeps throwing out explanations. Maybe a gas leak, maybe paranoia, maybe sleep deprivation. My editor called earlier about the missed deadline. I almost told him, but how do you explain running from something that laughed? Even now, I'm staring at a blank page on my laptop. There's a story here, the kind I normally rip apart with logic. Instead, I shut the lid. Some stories aren't meant to be told. Something in those woods is using memory to trap people. I almost became one of them. I never thought a single flicker of light could turn my whole reality upside down. But here I am, trying to understand what happened that night, knowing no one will believe me. I keep looking through the photos on my camera roll, all just black screens. No matter how many I took, there's nothing in them, just darkness. The place seemed like paradise at first, tucked way back in the Bitterroot Mountains. I thought it was the perfect backdrop to capture some raw, untamed wilderness shots, the kind of work that finally gets noticed. I've been chasing a real breakthrough for years, watching other photographers land deals while I tried to find a style that stood out. This time would be different. I had 3 solid days, all my best gear, and a burning need to prove myself. The property owner, old guy named Barnes, rambled on about strange lights in the woods while handing over the keys. I half listened. I was more focused on the perfect sunrise shots I'd mapped out, though. The way his voice dropped when he mentioned how the forest had a will of its own, that stuck with me. Still, I figured it was just the kind of eerie folklore every backcountry town shares. The first day went like a dream. I hit golden hour at just the right time, caught this series of shots with dew-covered webs that glittered like strands of silver in the early light. By night, I was editing those photos, feeling good, maybe for the first time in a while. Then I saw something out the window, a faint glow, like a lantern swaying behind the trees. I assumed it was a hiker or maybe another photographer, though I was sure Barnes said there weren't any campsites for miles. I tried to ignore it, but the light had this odd rhythm to it. 3 long pulses, 2 short ones, repeating, felt intentional. Before I even realized what I was doing, I had my boots on and my camera in hand. If it was some rare natural occurrence, some glowing fungus or unique insect, it could be the golden shot I'd been chasing. The forest at night was a different world. The darkness pressed in like a weight. My flashlight beam barely reached ahead, but that other glow, that odd pulsing light, it remained steady, pulling me deeper. I should have turned back when the first photo showed only darkness. Nothing where the light should have been. I blamed the settings, but I knew better. Still, I kept walking. Then the voices started. At first, they blended in like wind through leaves, but they grew sharper. Words formed just beyond clarity. They kept growing louder, more urgent. And then the light disappeared. The forest went silent. Not just quiet, dead silent. No insects, no wind, nothing. My flashlight gave out. The darkness swallowed me. Panic set in. I had no idea which direction led back to the cabin. Then I heard them, footsteps, not just from one side, from everywhere. The flame returned, closer now, and in its flicker I saw them, shadowy figures, smoke and ember wrapped into human forms that didn't move like people. The worst part? The light began showing me memories. My dad's proud face at my graduation, my sister's hug when I left home, the last kiss I shared with Lena before I chose career over love. They played out in the flame, warm and inviting. I was about to step into it, drawn like a moth, when lightning cracked the sky. The flash broke whatever trance I was under, and in that moment, I saw the truth. Skeletons trapped inside the flames. Dozens, maybe more. Hollow eye sockets glowing with fire. Bony arms reaching, jaws wide, mouthing silent screams in rhythm with those whispers. The storm saved me. Each flash lit the path just enough for me to run. Branches tore at me, roots tried to trip me, but I didn't stop until I reached the porch and collapsed. At sunrise, I grabbed my gear and drove off without even locking the place. I sent the best photos to the magazine, the web trees, the misty hills, the hawk against the morning light. They were good shots, but the editor said they were looking for something more original. I still have those black frames on my hard drive. Every